And as Alicia, my team knows, like, I just didn't want to get surgery because when the surgeon came to me, he said, look, it's going to take you 13, 15 months to repair. And I said, well, that's a year of my life. I don't want to do it. And so I go down to Tom Brady's facility, which John ends up running a little bit later. And my physical therapist, Matt Denning, personal friend of some people in the room and mine, and now John's. And, I said, what would you do? And he goes, we would never get surgery for that. And so anyhow, I was hired and I spent, come on up, John. I spent the next little bit working with Tom Brady and team to try and help me. And in the process, I was lucky enough to get to meet John. And John is, almost every successful venture capital firm. I'm writing with Jimmy Pilata here in town, Summit, now runs his own venture capital firm, obviously work with Tom. And then what you may not know is John ran his own podcast. And so I went through some of the people you had. You had David Sinclair, Lindsey Vonn, the great skier, Alex Guerrero, obviously working with Tom, the author of The Blue Zone, Tom Brady himself. So some really interesting stuff. But I had lunch with you at Bianca over there in Chestnut Hill, and I was like, oh my God, John is like the most thoughtful person I know. So on top of all that success. But I thought, maybe I'll start with a question, John, I didn't prepare you for, but I know you're going to have thoughts. Evian talked about Stoic and this concept of conscious, unconscious mind. As you watch some of the genius or maybe the trivialities working with Tom, what would he say to Evian's presentation?
I think you'd love it. I think one of the great things that I'm most thankful for in my time working with Tom and being in his world, aside from cool Super Bowl parties with Snoop Dogg and Kenny Chesney and all that type of stuff, was the amazing people I got to meet beyond Tom, but not just meet, but in a more intimate way get to know a little bit. Some of that translated into the podcast I ended up doing. But I think Tom specifically and some of the things that you were talking about really resonated with me, because when you get to that level of performance in anything, literally anything, based on all these people I met, world champions, thought leaders in any area, in order to be great, they had to make huge sacrifices and oftentimes live lives that you or I may not choose to live. And one of the things that they all had in common, in my opinion, it's why I asked the neuroplasticity question, they're all intense learners and they want to get better, and a lot of them do it by focusing on the little things. And that was a big part of Tom. I could talk a lot about Tom's success and my opinion of why he was successful, because I think being a sports fan, Tom is not the most gifted physical athlete that you will meet. But he was extraordinarily successful. And there's a lot that went into that. And I think some of it is the mindset and what went into it. And this is a very true story. He wrote a book, which you're aware, the TB12 Method. And that came out right before I joined Tom to run the business. And I said, well, if you write a book, the only reason to write a book is if you're going to write a second book. You got to kind of build on the momentum. And my idea was, you should write a book on mindset. So, we could talk about advisors and how that world works. His big advisor at the time was his wife. So I presented the idea to his wife. So I sat down with G and I said, hey, I think we should do a book on mindset. She loved it. He hated it, because I don't think he wanted the world at that moment in time to really understand some of the things that were most important to him when it came to mindset, at least.
Yeah, well, no, that's fact. You got this, well, let's talk, because you were just getting into it. One of the things, I talked about your advisors, your friends, your coaches on the investment side. You've now worked with all sorts of people that have tons of advisors around them, Tom and team. You've worked with some other, and now you're working on venture capital yourself. What observation did you have as you watched these people that maybe had too many advisors or maybe didn't have their best interests at heart? I'll let you take that in any direction you want.
Yeah, that's well, the cameras are on, but I think, if any of you have ever been around iconic celebrities, it is a completely different world than the world that we all live in this room. And at some level, at a very human level, I feel bad for some of the people because they live in a world that's like distorted from reality. And a lot of that comes down to the people that are around them and why they're around them. Dave told you our story. We became friends very organically because that's probably how you've always done it your whole life. That's how I've done it my whole life. And I tend to surround myself with people that for some reason I like and they like me, and we develop a friendship. Well, that world is very, very different. And it is shocking to me the ulterior motives of all the people that come around. And I ultimately ended up leaving Tom in 2022, and there was about a year of thinking went into that. But I think one of the things that really was important to me that came into the decision over time was I was probably spending 4 to 5 hours a day, that is not an exaggeration, responding to friends of Tom who had ideas on what we should be doing. And back to the neuroplasticity and always wanting to learn and get better, for a person who deep in his DNA wants to be the best in the world in anything and was moving to a point of his life where he was losing the scoreboard and needed to find the next thing, he would meet people, and these were not like, you know, your local accountant you're getting advice from. This is like he's meeting with Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, like getting advice from people and then coming back to me, you should talk to so-and-so, you should talk to so-and-so. And I would have to spend all my time, and none of those people, what I realized, none of those advisors he brought in had the information that I had. And as an example, and this was in, you know, Dave knows some of the story personally because we've talked about it over the years. One of the biggest problems I had, I'll never forget, and this persisted, it's one of the reasons I did the podcast too, and I ultimately did that. I showed up at TB12 in late summer 2018, fall 20, like September-ish, I think it was. And our first board meeting, some of his advisors around the table, and they had launched a whey protein product shortly before I got there. And we were selling about 4 cans per day when I got there. And I said, Tommy, do a post, and we're gonna sell more. So I did a post, and we sold 5 a day. And that pattern repeated itself a couple times. And I'll never forget the first board meeting when I had to go in and say to this room, hey guys, like, I'm not quite sure the world is resonating with what we're doing right now. So all these people that are advising you don't have the information I have. And truthfully, I fought that battle for probably 3-4 years, and we took a business like from almost nothing to almost $25 million, literally in 3 years, in spite of all that. But I found in that world the other part, which was really weird. You can imagine this. If you are someone who wants to get into the world, you're not going to say great things about what we're doing because as soon as you say we're doing everything right, you serve no value to the purpose. And it's interesting when you look at advisors in that world, and I'm just talking about like the iconic celebrity world. I think LeBron James is the exact opposite example. LeBron James has a business partner, Maverick Carter, who they've known each other since growing up, and they have been maniacal about protecting the inner circle of who comes in. And yeah, I had to earn my way in, and I earned my way in, but there was always other people coming in, and Tom never treated me, or there was 1 or 2 other people he could have done it like Maverick Carter. And that made it hard. So I think one of the things I learned, and I've seen it in other parts of life as you have, I'm sure, and of course, you guys see it at Twin Focus, I'm sure, who you have as your advisors and who you trust for your advice, and what are their motives. We talked about motives before, I think it was you that talked about the motivations, is absolutely critical.
Yeah. John has taken this thoughtfulness and now running your own, I'm going to call it an early stage or more private equity model. And Dan Rasmussen and I have talked at length about his points on private equity and illiquidity and investing there. And I agree with him. Like it's cooked, right? It's overextended. It's hard to do the right thing. And yet I came to the table and said, I'm not making another investment, and I just invested in your next deal, right? And and so maybe if you don't mind talking about the deal, how you find it, what it drove you to it, and then maybe I'll just add to it what I saw in my, in my subconscious, what I picked up very quickly. I did a lot of type 1 Evian when found this idea. So go ahead.
Yeah, happy to do it. So before working with Tom, I've spent about 25 years in and around the consumer space, a very traditional private equity venture background. Ended up as the advice of a partner running a company in 2010 in Colorado. So I sort of spent the last 10, 15 years running companies and investing in them as well. And really found my niche in the consumer world. And one of the things that drove that for me early on, which will quickly lead to Luke's story, was I'm a big believer in health and wellness. Personally, I've always been into it. Every decision I make is not the right one when it comes to health and wellness, but most of them are. Personally, it's important. And I realized business-wise, it was a great opportunity. So one of the first areas I got into about 20 years ago, I started looking at, I saw innovation in health and wellness, was food and beverage. Because I said, you know what are some areas that have the biggest impact on people's life? And believe it or not, what you eat is probably one of the biggest movers of your overall health. So I've had a lot of success, fortunately, in food and beverage. Other areas like sports and fitness. I was the first investor in a company called Spartan Race, which we grew to quite a big company and very exciting, and obviously did stuff with Tom and others. So I've done a lot of exciting things, but food is something to me that I've been around for a while now. And a number of years ago, I met a guy up in Maine. His name was Luke Holden. He had founded a company called Luke's Lobster, which some of you may know Luke's from around the country. They have a number of restaurants. And I actually put a bid on the company back in 2016, the opportunity to invest in it, and lost out to a family office in Europe. Anyway, fast forward a number of years, continued to have success, some different things. This family office, for a variety of reasons, needed to get some liquidity. Luke had reached back out probably early last year, just knowing that the future of his business was very bright. But wasn't 100% sure how to capitalize on it. And I think in a session where we're talking a lot about checklists, Dave, I think one of the things we could touch on is checklists for entrepreneurs and management teams, which is a passion of mine. But got to know Luke more and realized very quickly there was a tremendous opportunity here. If you look at food and you look at your own lives and what you eat, and probably many of you have begun to eat healthier over the years, like most of us have, as good food becomes more accessible. We saw a lot of things happen in natural and organic fruits and vegetables. You've begun to see a lot of things happen in beef and poultry, antibiotic-free, hormone-free, regenerative farm-raised, things like that, free range, but nothing's really happened in seafood. And so as I'm talking to Luke, he had restaurants and he had an emerging frozen business as well. I started doing some homework. And I learned very quickly that 1/3 of all the seafood in the U.S. is harvested or farmed illegally. 25 to 75% of the seafood in the U.S. is mislabeled. It's mislabeled from as bad as you think you're eating shrimp from the Gulf of America, Gulf of Mexico, whatever Gulf you want, the Gulf. But it's really from Thailand, right? Or you think you're getting cod and it's farm-raised tilapia from South America. And on top of that, most of the seafood that comes into the U.S. comes in internationally, and it is harvested or fished with slave or child labor. So it's a horribly, horribly, horribly broken system. So we just put together a deal, and it hasn't been announced yet, we literally just closed it the other day, where we led an investment, my firm, Relentless Consumer Partners, with Whole Foods. And so Whole Foods is our co-investor in the deal, and their interest is obviously massive change in the seafood ecosystem. So we have a business with incredible unit economics, as you know, and business opportunity, but we have this secret weapon in Whole Foods as a partner who really wants to change the future of seafood as we know it.
So just have fun with Dave for a second, right? Why I started I agree with Dan Rasmussen. I can't hear another private equity deal.
And we were just having lunch when we just brought it up at lunch.
Right, and so here are the things I wrote down as I heard part of my checklist, right? The first, and Brian Spector mentioned it as well as Bob and Adam when they were on the panel, is that there was some type of forced seller, right? There was someone, and we won't get into details, but there was a reason the price and the opportunity was being set. Second, because I knew John, and we went through some of the details, but he already had me at hello, is I understood he would get the incentives done correctly because of his background and the time we said. So there's a level of trust just in your capabilities. I always talk about price mattering most for me. Nick has covered restaurants for a long time, me as well. This was trading priced more attractively than what I could get a public asset at. The growth was obviously higher. And then going back to, Joel, what you taught me 17 years ago is no money can be made unless you have high cash-on-cash returns. And these restaurants, the four-wall profits of these restaurants, John, I think are close to 40%, sometimes 100% per annum, and the growth is just starting, right? And then, small world story, you know, I'm mentioning to Christina, and she's like, "Oh, I love that place. In fact, we have it in the freezer." So my 11-year-old loves them, right? So maybe there was something coming in the, you know, the subconscious world that it was better because my son liked it as well. I don't know, but really makes a lot of sense to me. John, you alluded to it. You know, the burden of knowing a lot about your health is, I suppose, you feel guilty all the time. You're not following what everyone tells you to do. I'm curious you know, all the people you met, which is probably in around 100, who do you like to listen to the most? And then if you could elaborate, you know, what are the things you try and do yourself, and what are the things you'd like to do more of yourself if you could?
Yeah, that's an important question. So it's interesting. Everyone is familiar with the concept of influencers, and information comes at us from every direction. And David knows, for me, when I started Relentless, after I took some time off from Tom, I'm really excited about the intersection of consumer and healthcare. I think that's a whole nother conversation we could have. But again, going back to the question and where it comes from, health is first and foremost in everyone's mind. And having had the great fortune of meeting world champions and learning about all the things they did, you know, guys like Dan Buettner, who wrote the Blue Zones book, and all these people have these great ideas. One of the things that really resonated with me with some of the people I met were maybe some of the slightly lesser known people, but who did extraordinary things. So there were like a few that stuck out, and then some of what they did impacted some of the decisions that I make personally and what I do. So as an example, guy Colin O'Brady, he wrote some books. You can find him out there. He's incredible. He's a young guy. He basically, I think it's called the Explorers something. He did the 7 summits and the North and South Pole in 1 year, right? And got to hear the whole story about how he did that. And then through that, I learned how he trained. So he said, I met this guy, Mike McCassell, who does this thing, the 12 Laborers Project, and he trained me for this. So, okay, who's this Mike McCassell guy? I look up this Mike, I get on the phone. Hey, Mike, hey, I'm John Burns, love to talk to you about this. Got to know Mike. Mike has these incredible stories about how he trains and what he does. Like this guy literally, one of the things he did was flip a 250-pound tire 13 miles, but because he couldn't get the permits to do it where he did it in a 500-foot parking lot, back and forth and back and forth. Like truly extraordinary. He holds, I think, the record for cold plunge. It's like over 5 hours. It's like incredible, incredible people. I had a good fortune of meeting folks like here in Boston, Dr. William Lee, who wrote a great book, Eat to Beat Disease. Incredible. You mentioned Carol Dweck and Mindset, her book about mindset. Amazing book out there called Grit by Angela Duckworth. She was extraordinary. She was probably my favorite person. But all this stuff gets back to the core of what really resonated with me were the people who were willing to put the hard work in consistently day after day after day after day. And you know what? That was the magic of Tom. If you go back and you look at Tom's career, in one man's opinion, because he wasn't the most physically gifted, but because he took such good care of his body, he almost never missed practice. Now think about that in the world of the NFL, and this guy gets hurt and he misses like 7 or 8 weeks of practice, but he plays every weekend, right? Multiply that by multiple years and all those practices you miss. So that all got me to one place, consistency. So if I could give you one piece of fitness advice, and it's something I follow very, very, very religiously, it doesn't matter. Everyone gets focused on how hard their workout is, how long their workout is, and whatnot. I cannot tell you how many times a month I work out for 10 minutes. It's probably 5 or 6. But I do it because inertia is a very powerful force. The second you stop, right? The second you stop, it's easy to stay stopped, right? So it is super easy to do 30 air squats, 30 push-ups, and 30 crunches if you have a day where you can't do it. I shared with you a story. I try and, you know, I'm a little different. I grew up in a household where my mom wouldn't let us have the remote control because she thought you're lazy if you use the remote control. So a little bit of a different DNA, I guess. But, you know, sometimes, like a lot of people I'm sure in this room, you don't sleep great. Like, I live in Needham. You might see me walking around at 3:45 in the morning. Like, I'll go for a 5-mile walk if I can't sleep. Because I'm not just going to like toss and turn. Like, I'll get my exercise in, I'll go do my day. So consistency is the number one thing. And the only other thing I would say too, I think a lot of us self-identify when we work out with whatever it is that we love the most. I'm a CrossFitter, I'm a cyclist, I'm a runner, I'm a this, I'm a that. Same thing happens in diets. I'm a vegetarian, I'm on a carnivore diet, I'm this and that. I'm a flexitarian. Like, I like to do everything because I think you got to prepare yourself for life as you get older, especially, and do a little bit of everything. And as you get older, all the research effectively comes down to two things for longevity. And this is all proven. You guys can find this stuff out there. It's muscle mass and it's VO2 max, which is a measure of cardiovascular fitness. John Burns would add a third, because I had an aging parent who passed away and I went through the whole experience. You don't want to fall. So muscle mass is important if you fall, but you also want to make sure you're doing activities that are non-linear. So you're cycling and you're running and you're doing this, or you're bench pressing or you're squatting, or in one plane of motion. So one of my favorite things to do is hike. I always go out in the ugliest trails you can find that make me sometimes get in weird positions to get up, because I think you need to be able to move around. But you know, that's a sort of short answer to a very long question around, like, what do you do to stay healthy?
Well, I wrote down, you know, just consistency in little things, and yeah, that's the first one is something I need to work on, that's for sure. One last question on your business, John. Like, you know, the business of venture capital, private equity has changed. You're going at a slightly different model.
I am, yeah.
And many of the people in the room are going at different models, and that's why they're here. But like, tell me about it and what you think is happening in the industry.
Yeah, so just to get to that and just to show you how quickly the world changes, and I think we had some good conversation today around things that are changing in the world. I made my probably last investment in the venture capital world before starting Reliance in probably 2018, went to go work with Tom, and the world changed a lot between 2018 and 22. I took some time off. I started what is now Reliance Consumer Partners in early 23 with basically full intent. I'm just going to go raise a $100 million fund because that's what you do. Life got in the way a little bit. My father got sick, passed away. My wife had a bad injury. She's fine now. But the world changed, and fundraising was horrible. So, but I had planted my flag, and people knew I was back, so I was getting calls on really interesting deals. We've done 3 deals now so far. And I said, I got to find a way to get these deals done. And so I started putting together special purpose vehicles and whatnot, and that went on for a while and has continued to this day. Then I realized there's like this whole new world out there of what people call these independent sponsors. In fact, I just got back from a forum down in Philadelphia, this independent sponsor forum, because the big funds and the big LPs, they don't want to fund the big private equity funds anymore because of many of the things that were talked about today, misalignment of incentives, all those things. So they're looking for managers that are willing to throw skin in the game, put their energy and effort, like throw the bag over the wall, like this has to work, right? Because you're not sitting on 500 million or $1 billion of assets and go for it. So we've done that, and we've done it successfully so far. We're going to keep doing it right now. I love the flexibility of it. We've invested in companies as small as like 8 million to companies over 100 million doing it. So we stick to our knitting in terms of what we know, industry type of company, profile, growth vectors, all those things. But it gives us some flexibility. And I actually, from everything I'm learning, because I like to continue to learn, I think that's kind of the future where some of the business is going. And I think that's where you're starting to see smaller funds come out, different, unique hybrid groups. Family offices are becoming a big part of the investor world now too. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I know entrepreneurs, and I think the funding sources have changed, and they're excited about partners who are not regimented to like a typical fund strategy.
I mean, where you led with it too is this concept, incentives dictate behavior, right? You know, as a standalone, this deal's got to work.
Got to work.
Right? Got to work.
Yep.
It's, I led up my presentation. I talked about, Phil Tetlock and so just to finish off our conversation, I thought we'd do some sports probabilities.
Okay.
Right, John?
So
we're gonna and maybe I kind of cut them down the middle. So your job, is to say, is this a bet you want to take? And is it more than 50% true or not?
Okay.
Okay, so let's, Tom Brady had a diet healthier than 99% of Americans. Would you take the true bet or the false bet on that one?
I would take the true bet, but can also just say his diet wasn't exactly what everyone thought his diet was, but better than 99% of the people.
That's good, right.
I knew he ate strawberries.
Common thing, he actually just doesn't like strawberries. That whole thing got twisted. Like, literally, the kid Benny made him a cup. I love strawberries. Like, it was a joke in his family, but he ran with it.
You know, I use the word love as a work statement here,
Yeah.
right? You know, you've had people you loved working with, so I'm going to use that vernacular to say, Tom loved working with Bill Belichick.
I'm going to take the under.
You're going to take the under on that one.
Take the under.
Cut the tape. Let's see. On the you were I know you were caught up in because TB12 announced that Tom was retiring, right? Is that right? You guys did, and then he retracted.
That was my fault, actually.
But see,
Not technically.
that's why he's good at boss. He took blame, right? But like, you know, is there any chance we will see? I'm going to change the question.
Okay.
Is there any chance we'll see Tom playing another competitive sport as an athlete or football?
Yes,
Pickleball,
yes
you know,
on another competitive sport, no on football.
All right, that's good. Thank you so much. I think we have. Oh, sorry, we have time for a few questions. I cut it. Questions from the group.
I got something.
I'm no match for ChatGPT.
I know. I'm worried.
Oh,
These are for later. They're not. I wanted to ask you where you're hiding and stuff like that.
Jerry.
Are there any sort of new, when you think about consumer-related ideas, are there some that you're seeing bubbling up? Like Spartan Race is a great example. Something
Yeah.
that kind of existed between guys, just like,
Yeah.
guys who went to college together who did a thing, but you really blew it out.
Yeah.
Are there other things you're seeing out there? Because it definitely seems like a lot of folks are looking for community.
Yeah.
They may not just want, they just maybe don't want to go to church together. They may
Yeah.
want to go someplace else.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I'll start with that and give you a second one. The community thing's very interesting, especially it relates to fitness and sport. And we all lived through COVID, so everyone understands. Remember kind of the boutique fitness craze of the 2010s, Soul Cycle, Barry's, kind of all that stuff. I did a boxing gym with George Foreman and his son. Like, that's what everyone was doing. COVID hits, world's going 100% at home. Well, guess what? Exactly to your point. And this, we never went, we always kept our facilities open, because what I realized very early on, and what I think people have come back around to now, is that community really matters. And the truth is, for the generations behind most of the people in the room, there's some people in the generations behind, that fitness experience is the community. It's where their social club is. That's why you see what Lifetime's doing. You start seeing, Remedy Place, all these other places doing things. So I do think community is an important part of fitness. I believe one of the great opportunities go forward, but I haven't been able to put my finger exactly on it. I think because community is important, because people are more focused on it and will pay and want premium experiences, I think smaller versions of things like Equinox, there's great opportunity there where you can make it more local, because one of the greatest predictors of your ability to stick to a workout is how close to home it is. And so that's an important thing. But for a guy who works out mostly by himself or at home, I'm a little bit of the outlier. Most people like community. So always looking for things like that. I do see a lot, all the time now, I'm getting calls on, at least in fitness, or companies that are trying to combine wearables with AI for recommendations, right? And put the two together, right? And then provide some content, prescriptive content. That's an interesting one to me, but I find it a hard one to win, because it's like my AI is better than your AI with my prescriptions, my biometrics are better than yours, so it's a tricky one. I'm watching it. The other area that I like a lot that, in fact, when I started my business, what I really would love to focus more on, but we still see opportunities in more traditional stuff, is this intersection of consumer and healthcare. And I've used the term medical fitness sometimes before. Like, I actually think we're going to move to a world where, employers are paying less and less of your health insurance premiums. Like, you got high deductible plans. Health expenses are going up and up and up. People are beginning to learn the importance of proactive healthcare. There's an explosion of companies providing tests and diagnostics that you can pay for. I think the companies that can begin to pull this together into total solutions at the intersection of consumer healthcare are incredible. I invested in a company that it's a tech-enabled consumer company that helps couples with infertility issues. It helps predict a 5-day fertile window versus a 1-day fertile window. It's a company that has FDA approvals, getting more approvals, but ultimately we're going to pay for it out of pocket, so it's a consumer business in my mind. So I see more and more of that. I love that stuff.
Great. Damien, last question.
Obviously, TB12 is a lot of high-performing athletes. Was there one or two like overarching or common regrets among those athletes, wellness-wise?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will say the perception was we were always high-performing athletes. And fortunately, Dave and I were high-performing athletes. That's why we were clients. I was also a client. That's how part of how I ended up getting there. Yeah, I think a lot of them, and you'll find, and we had some success with this because of it. I think one of the things a lot of them regret is not taking care of their bodies when they should have. So Gronk's probably the best example of that. It's one of the reasons he retired. It's probably two reasons he retired when he retired, but then he came back, and we worked with him for about a year and a half, and really got his body right. And so I think, I'll use football players as an example. Everyone's got more sophisticated about taking care of their bodies, but even going back 10 years, these people were not taking care of their bodies. And they'll all tell you to a person, the professional football players, Monday morning feels like they got in a car accident. Every Monday morning. So I think that was one. And then I think the other one that you would hear from folks sometimes, but it's the trade-off, right? I didn't take enough time in my life for the other things, but that was a very retrospective look, because my experience and what I believe from everyone I met, you cannot be the best in the world at anything without making massive sacrifices. Like, just think about the simple things. Like, Tom Brady had his first real Thanksgiving of his adult life like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Like, he never had Thanksgiving like we all have Thanksgiving. And that's pretty consistent for high-performing people. So there's a little like after the fact regret, but I don't think anyone would have changed it in the time they did it. But taking care of the body was a big one.